everybody, and welcome to another hobby cheating video. And in this video we're going to talk about wings, namely textured wings. And one of the fun things about heavily textured wings is that you can make them look really good using really pretty simple techniques. So this is a chimera, the second of two chimeras I'm working on this month. And to start out with, all I did was do some zenithal highlighting, so you can see the rest of him is still just zenithal. And then I took the wings and just put some thin purple ink over them, so you can see how it preserved that highlighting. And one note about the zenithal highlighting on wings before you start: you got the whole thing in black, obviously, a nice gray line all the way down the center, and then white maybe halfway down here. That's a good place to start, because what we're always going for with our textured wings is they tend to look better, and this is true for both textured wings or normal wings for that matter. Wings will tend to be the lightest here at this point, where sort of, especially if the wing is stretched out, where the membrane is the thinnest. Like if the wing spreads way out like that, if it were to be in between my fingers, if that were to be wing, this part right here in the middle is where the membrane would stretch the most thin, hence where the light would show through the most. So you can play with that and really take it as far as you want. I tend to prefer like ultra high contrast, something that's probably beyond reality, but I think it makes the miniature pop. But it's up to you. The key being is that as the skin gets closer to the bone where it's attached here, it's going to get darker. So we're going to talk about just simple techniques and how you can pretty quickly, I mean, this is a big mini, but the things I'm going to use aren't really time consuming, okay? And we're gonna make these wings look hopefully pretty good. Okay, so where do we begin? All right, well, we're actually going to begin, I'm going to grab my old palette here, set it on top of my wet palette, because we're actually going to begin with a little dry brushing, okay? And I'm going to do that with a little model color ivory. There we go. Okay, so and the reason I'm using ivory here as opposed to, say, just a straight white is because I like to have a little bit of off tonality to it. And when you're working with purple, purple just doesn't react well with straight white. So you could even do this first step with like a light flesh tone or something like that. In this case, though, I'm going to use an ivory color. And I'm going to grab a nice big dry brush, something completely ridiculous, because we are not going to be delicate here. We are going to get all up in these wings. All right? So, and I need more paint than that for this. I don't know what I was thinking there. I was way too conservative on that. Let's get some serious paint out here. Okay. All right, serious paint gotten. Get some on our dry brush here. I'm just working it into some bristles into the bristles on a paper towel. Pretty standard. We're going to do the old back of the thumb test. So whenever you're dry brushing, you want to take the back of your thumb and you want to just kind of run the brush. And if you only catch the highlights of your skin, the cracks in between your skin don't color, you got the right amount of paint. And always make sure, a lot of times when you're dry brushing, you get thicker paint hiding up here in the tops of the bristles, and then if you drag at an angle, that can happen. So just be careful, make sure you got it all off. Now, what are we going to do? We're just going to go over them. Fairly light touch, because we don't want paint to get way down in there. And we're being fairly aggressive with this. We're trying to catch these wonderful ridges. There we go, we'll turn this so you can see. At this point, I'm not trying to be too careful, you'll notice. This is a pretty heavy, hard dry brush, and that's intentful. We don't need to be careful. We want to really, I'm not shoving the brush in there, but we really want to get a nice line down. There you go, we got all those ridges, okay? Same thing over here. Let's do it again. So all we're doing is, I mean, this is the simplest of processes, right? This takes no skill. You do not have to be careful. We wouldn't want to be careful. We're not trying to be careful. We're trying to be messy. Because what we want to do... You'll notice I'm also doing this before I paint any other part of the miniature. That is to say, before I get any paint near the rest of him beyond zenithal highlighting. Because I'm going to be messy here, and I'm going to be working with, you know, washes and stuff like that. I'm going to be having this big giant dry brush throwing paint around. So, it behooves us to be... So, that's what we look like now. You can see, it's a nice, messy dry brush job. That's okay. Because the key with this... So let's talk about what I'm aiming at here. What's my ultimate goal? The key with this is that... I'm going to do the underside of the wings here the same way. The key with this is that you just need lots of layers. And I don't mean layers in the sense of layering. That's not what we're aiming at. Okay? I mean it in the sense of, I think this underside I might actually need a smaller dry brush. This might be pushing it on the underside of these wings. Yeah, because it's a little small. Okay, I'm going to get a smaller dry brush for the underside. The key with doing sort of these big transition colors like this is you just need to go back and forth. The trick is it doesn't take a lot of time because you're not doing complicated layering or controlled glazing or anything like that. It's none of that. We're just grabbing paint and pushing it around. And we're going to be using a lot of like dry brushing and a lot of washes and stuff like that to do this. Okay? And it's going to look all messy and crazy at this point, and that's all right. It's okay. One of the best things you can do to get to a good paint job is to make your miniature look like crap somewhere in the middle. Let me say that. Every great miniature looks like garbage somewhere along the line. Do not, I've said this in previous videos, I'm going to say it again. Do not try to make your base coat, your early steps, look perfect. The reality is, you know, people talk about, well, I don't have the time to do a good quality paint job. Well, when you think like that, what you would then end up doing is trying to make your base coat, your early things, look perfect. And you actually take almost as long as you know, I'm going to take, but you waste your time on steps that don't matter and don't have good effects and don't lead to you know, really good looking outcomes. Okay? So with stuff like this, where I'm going to come back to it later and touch it again, I'm just going nuts. I'm going nuts with that dry brush. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of getting paint on the rest of his membranes here, his wings, these pieces. Who cares? I'm going to have to come back and paint those later anyways. So for now, whatever. It's no different than the primer that's on him, for our purposes. In many cases, if you're doing dark wings and you do this, it can actually be an advantage, because if you have a dark colored wing, you're going to want these membranes in here to actually be light colored, so you can actually kind of help yourself. You're kind of throwing a shade layer there in the future. So you can actually kind of get ahead of the game by accidentally dragging some paint up there. Look at that. Okay. I think we've got him all dry brushed there. Not a very exciting step, but there we go. He's all dry brushed. Okay. Alright, so there's the underside of the wings. You can see what we got there. What we got up top. Now real quick here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a little more dry brushing, because I want to make sure again that I've got the end of the wings the best. We always want to keep this part of the wing, the end part, the brightest. So I'm going to just go ahead and go over that specifically a few times with a smaller brush, just to make sure that I've really got a good, that I've really picked out all the ridges there. It's not going to make a huge difference in the overall vision of the thing, but it does help, because we want to set ourselves up for success later. Okay? Alright, there we go. Doesn't look good, right? Looks like garbage. Great. That's what we need. We need it to look like garbage. That's the first step. Okay, so clean off our brush. You always got to be very careful when you clean off your brush from dry brushing. Even though it's a crap brush, you don't want to ruin it immediately. Too much paint sits in there, it'll freeze up the bristles and you do need some kind of springiness in your in your dry brush. Okay, so what I want here is some purple wings. That's what I'm going for. It's going to be purple that transitions up into very bright. Well, that means at the edges, it's just going to be almost completely black, right? So what are we going to do for that? All right, well, we're going to start with our Druchii Violet. So we're going to start with a good old Citadel shade. And we're going to just shake that up. Okay. And again, I'm going to get my fairly large brush out, just a big old number 2 Taklon piece of crap brush. Just something that's not not used for anything important or any kind of real painting, because I'm going to get a bunch of ink here, or a bunch of shade here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be a little more controlled, because what I want to do is I want to cover everything except, okay, I'm going to cover everything except the center. And so I just want to drag it down. Again, I'm not really being careful. There's no exactness to this. Who cares? You get it a little too high, whatever. And I am going to let it pool some, but I just want to make sure it pools in the ridges and down here along the edge, right? And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to bring out that highlight. So you can see there, I went along, you can see where it's shiny, right? I went along the side and the side. And then I'm just going to repeat that. Now, this is going to take a little while, and it's going to take a little while to dry. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to pause it here for a moment, and I'll be back in a minute after I get all these on. But we're just going to continue the same thing. Let me see if I can actually do this on camera. We're just dragging it right along the edge, right? I'm going to cover over my white. I'm using it like a tint. I'm just tinting that white, just letting it gather there. I'm leaving the center untouched for now. But we will touch that in the future. Okay? So there you go. Alright, we'll be back in just a minute after I wash all this and it dries. Alright, we're back. And we've got the purple, the Druchii Violet, all applied. You can see we focused it along the outer ridges. And we left sort of the white dry brushing there. So if I angle this, you can still see my white ridge line here. And where we let it collect, it's darkest down here. So we've started creating this transition we want, right? And in a lot of the cases, obviously, since it's just a wash and not paint, it just tinted some of this white purple. So you can see the color variation here in between how bright it is here versus up here where it was completely covered. When we flip underneath, much the same thing. You want to be a little more heavy with your wash on the inside of the wings. You can see it's still a little wet there, but that's okay. We're going to keep going. Because, well, I mean, the thing is sitting like this. The light is hitting at this angle here. So this part of the wing would be a little brighter than the underside, although obviously leather membranes like this would be slightly translucent. And so that's what we're trying to capture here, right? And the way we're going to capture that is we have to make our paints play with light in the same way that reality would. Now, we can't make this see-through because it's a solid piece of plastic, but we can do our best to fake it. And as I said before, the key to that is lots of layers of paint interacting. All paint is semi-translucent. The more you stack on top of each other, each one slightly shows the colors from underneath. As the light travels through the layers, each one is reflecting it back, right? Each layer is reflecting different aspects of the light back, and that's what creates interesting tonal variation, okay? So our next step is going to be, we want to darken the ridge lines down even more. I want to take them way down, because contrast is king when it comes to making big surfaces like this. Interesting. So I'm going to use the Vallejo Game Ink Black for this, though you could just as easily use Nuln Oil or something like that. The reason I'm using the Game Ink as opposed to Nuln Oil is because Nuln Oil is a little thinner, the ink is obviously a little stronger, and I really want a fairly strong tone here. You could use Nuln Oil, though, like I said, it's no real big deal. You'd get almost the same effect out of it. And, at worst, you might have to apply it twice or something like that. So it's not really the end of the world if you didn't have access to the Game Inks. I'm not using, like, the Inktensity inks or the P3 inks or anything like that, because those tend to have a shine to them, and I really don't want anything glossy here. This is a leather membrane. So you can see that's where the ink is. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm just really going to take that down the ridge here. And it's going to be quite stark. And that's okay, because what we're going to do is, while it's still wet, we're going to take a little water on the brush and we're going to smooth out that edge line. Like, we're going to literally almost wet blend the edge line of that ink. Okay? So what we get is something like that. You can see how much darker that is. And what we're doing here is providing for when we contrast it with the body later, we'll be primed to go. So once again, I'm just going to get a little more of that ink, and I'm going to run it right down just the edge of the membrane. Again, I'm not doing anything incredibly tricky here. Like, I'm basically just tracing this line. And you don't need to be careful. If you get some too far up, who cares? Part of what we're doing here is then taking water and just smoothing it out. So we get a nice, subtle transition. Okay? Alright, so I'm just going to keep doing this once again on all the little edge lines here. We're going to go down, and I'm going to do it all of the sides of the membranes every time. So we just take it, we run one down, we get a little water in, and then we just spread it out, smooth out that ink. Okay? So what we get is something like that, where now we have this really dark line. You can see the difference between here and here where I haven't done it yet. All right? So I'm going to keep that up. I'm going to do it to all the little wings. I'll be back in a minute. All right, and we're back. So you can see all the black is dried, and so now we've got this very nice effect here where we're going from extremely dark down to extremely light, or up to extremely light, rather, I should say, sorry. So the next thing we want to do is actually, we're going to do another quick dry brush step, okay? But we're going to use something a little in between where we were before. And the reason we're going to do that is because I want to re-pick out some of the highlight we lost in the deep washes, and I want to kind of even out the lines of the wash here. Now I hear you asking, but Vince, why didn't you just do this in a different order? Good question, Internet. The answer is because I didn't want to. I wanted to do it in this order, because by doing it this way, we're creating those layers, right? So this was a very intentional choice, to dry brush, then wash, to zenithal, then coat it, then dry brush it. And this, like, it's easy to just go, oh my goodness, that's so many steps. That seems like such a large amount of work. Again, I will submit to you that the number of steps means very little, and that what you do during those steps means a whole lot, okay? If a step is more or less a fairly simple, easy thing of just dry brushing or whatever real quick, who cares? It takes you 5 minutes, you know? If a step is to go in and be very careful and take a lot of time picking out detail, that's a much different story. So for this, I'm actually going to, as I mentioned earlier, flesh highlights. So we're going to use some model color light flesh, which is a very nice tone. And this time we're not going super hard. This time I'm going to take that light flesh and I'm just going to very lightly dry brush. And I'm focusing not on the edges, but I'm not ignoring them. But I want to focus more on the center of the wing. Okay? So it's not that I'm ignoring these darker edges we washed over, because I want to get some definition back in those ridges. I'm just focusing a lot more of the dry brush strokes onto the higher part of the wing. Okay? So you can see there, we've gone back to this sort of it's a little more, it really looks more white in the video than it is in reality, but we've gone back to kind of picking it all out. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep going along that. Again, I won't do all of this one on camera because you don't really need to see me dry brush. I think you probably know how to do that at this point. I will just say that once again, I'm going to focus on the edges here, right? Like these areas here down by the bottom, because I want them to be the brightest. But as you can see, you know, as I'm just sitting here talking, I'm already on the little, you know, the fourth little wing section. And this is a very quick process. But nonetheless, I'm not going to do it all on camera because that would be boring. So I'm going to cut it, finish up my quick dry brushing step, and then we're going to pick back up from there. Alright? Back in a minute. Alright, welcome back. And as you can see, we've got a little change of scenery as we're back in the airbrush booth to finish this off. So you can see what I did here is finish out the dry brushing on the ridges. Okay, and that really does look way more white on camera than it is in reality, but you're going to have to trust me that it's a little more subtle effect, but it's still very rough. We don't want it to be that rough. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to use the airbrush to even all this out. Now, if I wasn't using the airbrush, you can do it without. You would do it all with glazes in the same kind of colors that I'm going to do here, okay? But barring, if you do have access to an airbrush, well, then let's go that direction. And we're going to use 3 colors here, okay? The first I'm going to use is Ghost Tint Purple from Badger Minotaur. Then I'm going to use Ghost Tint Magenta, same thing. And we're going to use some Pale Flesh from Game Air, which is basically the same color as that light flesh that I dry brushed. And you'll see how we're going to use all 3 of those here in just a moment. But effectively what we're going to do is we're going to just give a nice even coat over this. That's why we sort of did this very extreme highlighting. And then we're going to build it back up. And remember, all of these steps have been very quick. Like, I've taken a while, as usual, to explain everything I'm doing. But really, it's a pretty fast process. None of these required any amount of brush control. None of these, required me to be very careful with what I was doing or, you know, very clever about it. I've really just been, you know, more or less being very sloppy and messy because I can be. And that's part of the fun of these heavily textured surfaces is, yeah, I'm doing a lot of different things, but as far as the steps go, but it doesn't in any way actually take a lot of time or require a great deal of effort or anything like that. Okay? Alright, everybody. Well, I apologize. I actually lost some video there because it just decided to stop recording. So I'm going to have to catch you up on what we did. We took our purple, we went over the whole wing. We took our magenta, we went over just the center line here and tinted it just a little pink to create some interesting tonal variation. Then we started adding pale flesh until we got up to pure pale flesh, focusing on this area. The key with this, and I'll redo part of it, I'll take him up a little even more extreme so I've still got the paint. The key with this is that all layers of this spraying, we're spraying at this angle, straight ahead. Okay? So we're always spraying like this. And the reason we're doing it like this, at this angle, is so we only catch the ridges of the highlights, and we leave the lower part dark. That's what we want. And the reason we're using pale flesh instead of, say, white, you might ask me, well, Vince, could I use white? No, you always want to use flesh or something like that for highlighting purple. And the reason is because you want that rich purple tone to come up from underneath. And to do that, you need something that's slightly translucent. And white is, by its very nature, if you think of the science of it, white reflects everything. That's why it's white to your eyes, because it's reflecting all elements of the spectrum back to you. Okay? Whereas flesh is actually basically it has a lot of red and blue and other tones in it, but it's allowing more of the light to penetrate through, meaning you can now see some of that rich purple tone coming up from underneath. So I think that produces a nice effect. I'm sorry I lost the video there, but I still want to post this and get it up there. I apologize. We took a lot of steps here, and I don't have another Chimera, so there we go. But hopefully you enjoy it. It makes a very high contrast wing. I think it looks really good on the table. It looks good close up. All your detail lines have some interesting things going on. And it's a lot of fun to do. So I hope you enjoyed. Apologize for the technical difficulties, but still wanted to get this one out there. And hopefully you can see what I did. The key is, as I said, as you're going up, always be spraying at this angle, straight down, so that these ridges here remain. Okay? Alright. Well, thanks again for watching, as always. Greatly appreciated. And as always, we'll see you next time.